So I'm going to get started. You're recording? Okay. My name is Dave Wilson. I work for SecureWorks. I've been with them about 4 years. Shut up. Very happy. They keep me happy, but I do want to go over a disclaimer. So before I get into this, I know it's lame, but otherwise I wouldn't be able to share this stuff with you. So, but this job, I don't get to do all the cool stuff that you see on CSI. I usually don't even deal with forensics too much, but I've got a lot of experience in it, and I like to. Mobile devices are a hobby of mine. So, does anyone out here do forensics? By show of hands, currently doing forensics. Okay, you guys do any forensics on mobile devices? No? Okay, good. So the purpose is to sort of give awareness to the techniques, processes, and procedures and that are currently being used by various professionals, forensic professionals. Don't take this as your sole basis for doing any work. So this is just another guide. And again, it's meant to inform. It's not meant to walk you through any particular process, and nor to be used in a court of law. So I'm just throwing that out there. So my background, I've got about 2 decades worth of security experience in the IT world and security. Anywhere from, I was in the Navy for 6 years. I also part-time as a professor. I try to inspire the youth to learn more about cybersecurity. So I've got multiple certifications. That's not so important, but the why is it important that we talk about mobile forensics is these digital devices have so much data on them, and people don't realize how much is contained in there. It's your life in your hand. It's valuable to you. It's valuable to marketers. It's valuable to investigators. So it's equally important that as an investigator, I want to be able to obtain a mobile device in order to pull information off of it. But at the same time, as a, I don't want to say it like that. If I ever was considered a criminal, or if I was ever put in that position, I'd want to be able to protect my own information just as much. I don't want marketers grabbing it. I don't want some bad guy compromising my device and emptying my bank account. So what can we find on mobile devices? We can find emails, text, chat, GPS, addresses, your call history, your phone book, your contacts, call frequencies also, how often you call people, photos, videos, audio. Those can sometimes even be enabled remotely with malware. So we can figure out what applications you typically like to use. If you use one on your phone, you probably use one on a desktop, vice versa. Your Wi-Fi history, it tracks every single hotspot you ever connect to. It tracks, you can see where someone's been, what hotspots your phone has seen, because it'll keep track of that, whether it was able to connect or not. And then also your social media history. There's so much, there's a complete wealth of information with social media for an investigator. So each of the devices have unique ESNs, IMEIs, and IMSIs. These are your unique identifiers that are assigned by the manufacturer when the device is built for the radios. And depending upon whether it's CDMA, TDMA, it's GSM, etc., it uses different identifiers in order to connect those networks. You'll have multiple identifiers. Some of them are sort of spoofed in order to connect to legacy networks, and some of them are also forged, and you may occasionally come across duplicates. So that's just something that investigators need to keep in mind. These can be forged and spoofed. Also, your MEID. I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to share these slides So you can have all the deeper technical information around this, but again, an example of the MEID where it uses a pseudo ESN, where the ESN is not a true ESN; it's a partial ESN that's built from the MEID. So, getting to the data, we want to acquire an image of the device. The best option and the most ideal is to do a bit-for-bit copy. It's where you have an ideal situation where you've acquired the handset, it's powered on, you're able to dump it. You can use JTAG. JTAG will connect to the device using a special access port. It's non-destructive. It gives you a raw binary file, and then you can process that using a variety of tools. Another method is a logical method. It's when the device is recovered and it gives you a better insight into the operating system. You're able to see the files in their native format. It's not you're not having to reconstruct it because they're already there, and it's usually in a format that your forensic tool will be able to read. So. One of the examples is Android mass storage. When you plug in an Android device, it recognizes it as a mass storage device. You can easily dump files from that. You can treat it just like you would an external hard drive. A manual method, that's the least favorite, but it is a viable method and it has been recognized. Where you've accessed a device, you have the passcode, or it's not locked. So sometimes there are people that just don't lock their phones. I don't know why, but not recommended. But it's absolutely a means of last resort because as you manipulate you're not protecting the device. You can manipulate the data on it. So it's not always it's something you want to absolutely avoid as an investigator. So, and how many people do you know that actually have their device unlocked? It's rare, but there are people. So probably not here, hopefully. So other methods would be hacking the device. Again, this is not always a method because, again, you're manipulating the device and you're compromising the integrity of it. But in certain instances, you can root the device or jailbreak it and not compromise the data, and I'll get into a little bit of that later. But even when you do still root it and you're able to take the image off, you may have to decrypt it using an additional tool because the way the Android and iOS will encrypt their data partitions or the raw file, even if you're able to dump it from it. Other methods would be using the BlackBerry desktop software backups or iTunes backup, because if you have a user or suspect and they've attached their device and synchronized with the local workstation, you may not have access to the actual device, but if you can get into the workstation, it's just as good. It may be slightly out of date, but there's still a wealth of knowledge, and there are tools out there that will help you reverse or decrypt an encrypted backup. So I'm going to talk more about the actual forensic artifacts and uniqueness of each of the operating systems. So iOS is a very popular platform. I'm sure everyone understands that, and it's great for enterprise-owned, user-owned devices. A lot of companies like you to bring your own device. It's great. It just works. Apple is one of the only device manufacturers that forbid mobile operators from introducing additional pre-installed software. So they want just their stuff. You won't find any of the junk bloatware or one-off things that make the device more vulnerable. And it's obviously available in a variety of sizes. They're all treated the same. They all run the same iOS. The only thing that differs between them is basically the rendering of the screen output. There's different technical features, or processors that they use. I'm going to say that, I'll go back to that. So I'm kind of skipping over it, but for the most part, this is correct. So things about iOS is it does use the hierarchical file system, HFSX, which is an enhanced version of HFS Plus, which is also used by OS X. It does not use any removable storage, so there's no flashes. You can get additional removable storage, but by default, it doesn't support it on the actual device. So it is based off of a variant of Unix, which is also the same variant, which is similar to the OS X. It is a closed source proprietary license, so they really frown upon reverse engineering. It does support 32-bit and 64-bit ARM multi-core. So Apple has protective controls that are enforced using code signing, which require signature validation, and it starts at the boot ROM, and it requires the validation for third-party and built-in applications. There are ways around that, but this talk isn't for that. There is also data execution protection, which limit the ability for someone to compromise the software and execute arbitrary code. The data execution protection basically prevents an application from reading and writing, or writing and executing. The data execution protection prevents the software from being able to write to the same memory space from which it is also going to execute. So it never does both. And then we also have address space layout randomization, ASLR, which these are executables and libraries distributed with iOS that are compiled to randomize the address locations at startup for where the memory is written or read. Makes it more difficult in order to predict where the application is going to be loaded or read from in memory. And there are ways to also bypass this, but we'll get into that. Well, we won't get into that later. The code signing works for the most part, but I'm sure people have heard there's flaws in that. You can generate your own certificate. You can trick people into accepting self-signed certificates that you generate with a developer account, things like that. So it helps trace things back, but you can create a fake account, create a developer account, pay them money. It's like $100 to be a developer, and you can start writing malware. It'll be accepted. There are exceptions with the code signing. So JavaScript within the mobile Safari is compiled using the Nitro environment, using a just-in-time compiler. And it's specifically permitted to use the memory location that is both writable and executable, which is how they've created a lot of the jailbreaks. So iOS encryption, the file system's encryption is enabled immediately once the device is configured to use a passcode. That's how it was before. I believe it's enabled by default on iOS 9 and above, but and then it's used to protect not only the confidentiality of the files and data stored within them, but it also uses a key bag, and keys are stored inside the key bag, which include which uses the device passcode as the master key to decrypt the key bag contents. So somebody can crack your 4-digit PIN they can get into the key bag if they're able to get to a backup file and extract it from there. So, of course, again, these are things to consider where you may not have direct access to the device. You may be working with a backup or a partial copy, things like that. The encryption can be circumvented by an attacker, again, through the retrieval of the encryption keys stored on the device, and or through the use of APIs. If you've jailbroken your device, you've opened it up and made it susceptible to attack from other applications. That's one way they can also compromise your key bag. So the iOS privilege model, it uses the model of minimum privilege. Notifications are exposed to users so that when an app attempts to access a controlled privilege, it generates a pop-up before granting the access. Privileges are available, but only it's not able to ask for something that it hasn't been approved through the application process, through the app application process, where Apple has vetted or reviewed the application code. So they typically won't allow, if something like that is discovered, they usually pull it if it's reported. So, something else on that one. Applications are forbidden from interacting with each other, and the way it does that is it sort of loads each application in its own, any other word for it, its own root folder. So it isolates each application within the file system, and it's only given permissions to load its updates, any of the files it creates, and downloads within that particular folder. There are exceptions to that where it can share pictures and videos and other media with other applications when permitted. But for the most part, it's isolated. That's why when you try to access like a Word document from one file to another, it's not usually available. You can't just access any of it unless you've jailbroken your device. So updates are typically distributed with security and functional enhancements, although there have been updates that include only security fixes or serious flaws. They're typically made available to anyone with a supported device, and they maintain updates for the last 4 iPhone products, typically. Unlike other platforms, the distribution of the hardware and software is controlled by Apple, so it prevents mobile operators from adding the additional bloatware. And another benefit is it usually has the longest supported software maintenance duration, meaning you could have an iPhone, I'm trying to think, 5, and there's 5S, and they're still supported. They're still getting updates with the iOS 10. Even though it came out with, I think, iOS 6 or 7 on that one. I don't remember the original one, but something like that. So it also helps with like resellability. So it's the longer a device is supported, the more it's still useful. A lot of people enjoy that because that's why they're still in high demand. The file partitions, so it typically has 2 partitions on the actual physical device. There's a read-only partition, which is made writable only when there's a firmware update, and it's only, and this partition contains the system files, upgrade files, basic applications that Apple pre-installs. The second partition is what contains the user data and your other applications where that you've downloaded and added from their app store. This is also where this is the target that you want to obtain. This is where this is where the gold mine is, if you will. So there's common file types we'll find on the iOS device. There's SQLite databases. There's property lists. SQLite databases are popular for mobile devices. and open source applications. It's a relational database. It contains it's C programming. It's contained within a C programming library, and it implements most of the SQL 92 standard, but is missing a few key features. One example is, when you delete, it's not really deleting it. It's just marking it available. It says space available. So you can still recover a lot of things out of a SQLite database, which is useful. Property lists are used to store various types of data, either in a binary or XML format. And you can easily get a reader or somebody to convert that file to a readable format for yourself. The iOS directory structure resembles a Unix layout. It's commonly across all iOS devices. Some files will be stored in a text format and easily readable, while others are stored in the SQLite databases or XML files or binary format. These are all the different locations where you can find the gold, if you will, on the device. So you have your iTunes applications, you have your photos, keystrokes, passwords, notes, text messages, browser cookies, your searches, address books, call locations, and geolocation. So within geolocation, this is the Wi-Fi location, which contains the latitude, longitude, MAC address, and timestamps of the different wireless infrastructures the device is connected. And then it has cell location. So again, they can see what cell towers you've come by and then triangulate against that. So since the storage medium is as an embedded device, there's challenges often associated with it. So iOS version 5 will have different security parameters than iOS version 8 or 9 or 10. The techniques required to obtain an image from a 5 are much easier and are less complicated than trying to acquire an image from an iOS 8 or 9 device now. And that's just because it keeps changing. Methods change, whether you can, so if somebody brought me an iOS 10 device, I wouldn't necessarily be able to acquire an image, because if I couldn't jailbreak it, there isn't a jailbreak available currently, and I don't write jailbreaks myself. I'd have to look for one of the alternate methods of acquiring an image. So, and it's just, as technology evolves, we have to catch up, and that usually what's lagging behind are forensics. So Google Android. Google Android is one of the other most popular mobile operating systems in use today. It's regarded as a great alternative to the tightly controlled, rigid iOS platform, governed by an open handset alliance through which Google leads, but they are not the sole controller of that alliance. It's used by many manufacturers for phones, tablets, and other wearable devices. Following that particular standard, the hardware manufacturers have to comply with certain requirements in order to support the official Android platform, but they are permitted to add and remove content as they see fit. The third-party manufacturers often add their own custom software and other software based upon requests from mobile operators, while restricting the platform to prevent privileged access and the removal of additional software. So the mobile operators and or manufacturers will add their own applications that are then locked down. You're unable to remove them unless you root your device or modify the boot ROM, etc. So that's why a lot of people want to root an Android device, but I'll get into why that's not necessarily a good idea too. With increased manufacturer competition, the different vendors are pushing for more innovative features such as the NFC, dual screens, and trying to think, there's another one I was thinking of, but Android's a great platform to let you sort of experiment, and it's still kind of wide open. So, It does use a forked version of Linux 2.6 and 3.0 kernels. The file system is yet another file system too, which was depreciated, and then it transitioned to the extendable 4, and also will use VFAT or FAT32 for removable media. By default, you can obviously change that if you're booting your own custom ROM and things like that. It's Linux-based, so it functions pretty much the same way Linux operating does, but by default, they remove a lot of the executables, which you can recompile or load onto the device. And the executable architecture uses Davlik and executable and linkable format, ELF. So the low-level functionality is implemented by the device hardware for the operating system. Most manufacturers use a boot ROM agent to validate the signature for the bootloader functions before invoking the Linux kernel and operating system. The boot ROM and bootloader are protected to prevent tampering or misuse by an attacker, but also restricts users from the extended functionality of freely manipulating the files. So, once it's booted, the platform security controls designed by Android are used, and then the user and group privileges are leveraged to protect against device misuse. The Linux kernel also invokes a Android init process, which then starts user space services such as the SD card auto mount and unmount tools, and the Zygote process to launch the Davlik applications. So when the application is installed, it's given its own application directory where it's free to read from and write to files. Again, so it's trying to put it in sort of like a jailed root folder. The directory structure is protected with a unique user ID that is assigned to that application or when it's initially first installed on the device. Using the file system controls, then it prevents the other applications from accessing that directory or associated file content. It prevents, it's intended to prevent, for example, if you install the Facebook app from immediately being able to access your Twitter application. So the content between the two applications are not immediately shared except for through photos or videos and things like that, media. It also helps you, so it doesn't have bleed over, but well, I'll get into that later. But the application isolation basically is typically sufficient, but has been utilized effectively on, and it's utilized in many Unix formats, but the application has to use the Android APIs in order to access other content through the system functions, which are then permitted through the application privilege controls. So once the device is encrypted, all user data is automatically encrypted before committing it to disk. It reads, automatically decrypts the data before returning it to the calling process. The Android disk encryption is based on DEncrypt, which is a kernel feature that works at the block level, which is at a low level, but because of this, the encryption works with the embedded multimedia card format, which is in other similar flash devices. They present themselves to the kernel as block devices, so the encryption is not possible on if a device has YAFs, which talk directly to a raw NAND file chip, flash chip rather. That's important only in the fact that on some of the older devices, it wasn't possible to enable encryption. Not only was it a concern for speed and for speed and user experience, but also it wasn't possible with the file system they initially chose. So upon first boot, the device generates a random 128-bit master key, hashes it with a default password and the stored salt. Typically, the default password is default _password. That's changed when the user sets the PIN or password on the device. Actually, sorry, let me back up. It's encrypted with that, and then when the user sets a default PIN or password, only the 128-bit key is re-encrypted, not the remaining data that's already stored. So it doesn't cause it to go back through and re-encrypt it. So if you're late to the game and you encrypt your password, you want to set your password early on so it encrypts everything with that. So the use of Davlik and Java give Android memory management protection capabilities that are common problems for unmanaged languages such as C and C++. The Java language strings management and automatic bounds checking are enforced through the Davlik VM. But the memory management protection does not protect native executables bundled with the operating system. Until 4.0, only memory management exploitation mitigation techniques were used. And with 4.0, data execution prevention and address space layout randomization were also used to protect natively compiled applications, network services, and libraries. So, for software updates, these can be distributed over the air or installed manually using a sideloading process via USB connection or an external storage device. The mobile carrier and manufacturer are also responsible for delivering the updates, either by initiating the OTA process or by providing a method to install the update manually. This is one of the reasons I quit using Android, is because it took forever to get an update, to get things patched, to get them going. So it wasn't necessarily the carrier's fault. It wasn't necessarily the manufacturer's fault. It was the fault between all three of them combined. They wanted to point the finger at the other one, saying, we're waiting on the manufacturer to provide an update. The manufacturer says we've already provided it. They're waiting on the mobile operator to push the update to users. So, and then both of them would say, well, we don't know what we're going to patch it with. We're waiting for Google to tell us how to patch it or fix it. So, but that's one of the nice things about iOS is it's you're not left in the middle of a blame game circle, basically. So with Android applications, there's different privileges that are defined by the Android manifest XML file. These are evaluated and the user is prompted to accept or reject the permissions requested. That's still presented even when you install it from the App Store with the way they redesigned, I think it's 6.0, that you're given all the potential permissions immediately, and the device may still have that by default when you install it, but before even executing the application, you can go in and actually turn them off individually, which is nice. So you can prevent the application from accessing your contact, even though it's granted that initially by default, or things like that. Typically, before in some of the earlier versions, it was granting the access to the applications. It was an all or nothing. You either accepted everything they asked for or didn't install the application. The Android application signing is using self-signed certificates, which allow the certificate to include any desired identity information. These certificates are not intended to be identity validation mechanism for Android. Instead, they're simply used to simplify updates and prevent applications from overwriting another application, which is again another way these devices are attacked is somebody comes out with the application, they give that same certificate, and then they can sideload it or trick somebody into downloading it through a non-official repository. And when it updates, you think you're getting Flappy Birds, and it's overwriting your Gmail with some additional things to exfiltrate your data off to copy it to another user or to another location in the cloud. So prior to publication, Google did not require applications to undergo a vetting process. This enables developers to submit malicious or pirated applications for near immediate approval and publication within the official Google Store also. So most of the applications can be submitted and are available rather rapidly, and users can become infected if it becomes popular enough before somebody actually sits down, vets the code, or it's reported by enough people that, hey, something bad happened, like I started getting pop-ups or spam or whatever after I downloaded this app. It takes a while for them to catch on. The file partitions with Google Android, again, it's yet another file system too, which is designed specifically for embedded systems as it provided efficiency and performance. The Android Extensible 2, 3, and 4 and the VFAT file system are also supported by Android. Android uses several different partitions to organize files and folders on the device. These are have distinct functionality, like the /boot includes the kernel and RAM disk. /system contains the entire operating system, and /recovery is an alternate boot partition for recovery. There's also /data, /cache, MIST, SD card and SD card extension. The difference between those two would be one's considered an auxiliary storage location for media documents and applications. The other one is not a standard partition, but one that is used by custom ROMs to sort of give extra memory and space and extend the /data partition when it's limited on devices with minimal memory. So the Android debugging bridge is another method to which you can connect to the device. It's a command line tool that communicates with an Android device using the software development kit. It runs a daemon in the background on the Android device, and along with the ADB server running in the background, you're able to connect to it from your desktop through USB or even remotely if you have SSH enabled on the device. So there's different forensic artifacts. These are typical locations where we'll find the user installed data. We'll find related app data. We'll find miscellaneous media. There's where we'll find the list of applications that have been installed on the device, and then your application usage, the last time somebody used a particular application. You can find applications that were previously listed in the packages file that may have been uninstalled or removed, so that helps you with figuring out did they have Tinder on their phone? Well, yeah, you can look in here, you can see they had Tinder on their phone because it was assigned, it's assigned that unique user ID to isolate the application, whereas even though it's been uninstalled, it'll remember it for the next time it's downloaded and installed. So there's also the user authentication database, which contains a lot of great information here: usernames, passwords, service providers, meaning like Google, Facebook, etc. These are used for part of that shared authentication, so where you can sign into things using your Facebook or Google account with other apps. Also, the Android browser is the database here contains usernames, URLs, passwords, data entered into the web forms for autofill, things like that. Your maps, it'll show a history of all searches that were used for the map application, your text messages, and then also your contacts. Some of the limitations with Android devices is that there are so many different manufacturers and variants, like Amazon puts their own spin on things. Samsung kind of does their own thing with the Android base, that it's difficult to come up with a standardized, repeatable method to always acquire the data from Android devices reliably. So you're always going to get curveballs with Android devices. That's one of the bad things. So it's what may work for your Galaxy Edge will not work with your Kyocera dual screen, whatever. So there's a lot of differences out there. So I'm going to talk about BlackBerry next. And yeah, I know, I forgot people still use these two, but they're still out there. They're still making these phones. People still buy them. People still use them. It's a proprietary mobile operating system that's developed by BlackBerry Limited. It's a platform best known for their native support of email solutions. A lot of people like the features the BlackBerry phones have, profiles, etc. These use a particular QNX proprietary format for their file system. They also support VFAT and FAT32 for SD cards. The executables are typically Java, Adobe Air, or repackaged Android. The QNX OS is Unix-like, and the license for this is proprietary. The devices have previously supported encryption services such as AES or triple DES, depending on the device hardware capabilities. BlackBerry stores the encryption keys on the hardware, protecting the key using the device passcode. The BlackBerry can also encrypt external media cards. However, if encrypted, then the card cannot be read on an external system without the key, which is stored on the device. The BlackBerry solution to provide the encryption options to end users, where the media can be encrypted using the device passcode and key system, or within the device passcode, within the device passcode only, thus enabling the media to be read by another system. There are flaws with this. I think I talked about that a little bit later, but if not, you can see me afterwards for that. But there's easy ways to recover keys for BlackBerries, which is why I load these things. So they're not very secure. But BlackBerry developers are initially limited to development using Java, but they have since integrated the ability to accommodate development using other runtime environments, including Adobe Air, C++, HTML5. The newer devices actually can run Android applications that are written in Java for the Android Doblik interpreter using the Android App Link emulator. BlackBerry Enterprise Server, it's a software platform supplied by BlackBerry for enterprise organizations to perform the device management and functionality and serve as a gateway for devices to access the internet, as well as synchronize their calendar, contacts, etc. If a device is still attached to a BES, then you can just simply issue a password reset, which doesn't destroy any user data. It grants the investigator access to the device. If the device is tethered to a local workstation, then you can pull the organizer, the music, the photos, the media, etc. off that workstation from a backup that a user creates. These are different artifacts on the device. There's the info MKF, which contains an encrypted hash of password used to lock the device. It can easily be cracked using a third-party tool. An IPD, which is, or BVB extensions are used for the desktop software or backup files which are stored on the workstation, so you can search for those. There's the thumbs, which has a thumbnail, cache of thumbnails and pictures. There's encrypted files have an extension of RAM or REM. They can only be decrypted by the device, or you can also throw them into an emulator and open them that way too. But they did, that was an exploit that they fixed back in BlackBerry OS version 7, but there's other methods too. There's BlackBerry version 5 and earlier, used CSVs on the memory card. This contained a conversations, if history was enabled for your BlackBerry Messenger, things like that. There's this is the date time format. This is the you had contacts contained in the con or back files, and then you also had on version 6 and 7 they had it in database format. So, but again, you can easily pull these out using tools. So when the device is password protected, the password must be entered before volumes will mount if you're trying to attach it to a workstation. But by default, the packet files created with the link will be encrypted, even if the device doesn't have a password set. And then the files cannot be mounted by a simulator for BlackBerry OS version 10. But the backup files can only be decrypted if the password is known or cracked, which isn't too difficult with these things. And then the logical extraction is very limited with BlackBerry devices, but is possible with third-party tools. So Microsoft Windows Mobile. So Windows 8 replaced the previous CE architecture for Windows mobile devices. It's based on a Windows NT kernel. It shares many components with the Windows 8, allowing developers to easily port applications between the two. Windows 10, when it was announced, was a mobile operating system for smartphones and tablets with screens smaller than 8 inches. Now it's 10. They scale it for anything. They initially were going to have 2 ports, but they've since seen the light and decided against that. So it is the first. It is a successor to Windows 8 Phone, and it replaced the Phone branding. So most devices are free to upgrade to it, and most people have upgraded to Windows 10. So unless they're paranoid about privacy, but anyway, that's another topic for another day. The file system uses NTFS, FAT, or extensible FAT for removable storage. It uses portable executions for binaries. It can also, I'll get into it later, but applications can also be written using the Microsoft XNA or Silverlight or .NET platforms. So with mobile encryption, 7.5 introduced a data protection API, which offered developers the option to protect their authentication credentials and other resources. This allowed applications to save sensitive resources with a key that was only accessed once the device is unlocked. And the functionality was extended to mobile devices, enabling support for internal memory encryption, but not removable media. Once BitLocker was enabled, the phone automatically begins encrypting the internal storage. The encryption key is protected by the TPN Trusted Platform module and is bound to the UEFI Trusted Boot to ensure that the encryption key will only be released to Trusted Boot components. So the device PIN, password, and BitLocker security features are independently enabled. So you can have a PIN, but it doesn't mean they have BitLocker enabled with with encryption on the device, and vice versa. You could have it. Okay, you can have a BitLocker enabled, but not a PIN. So developers submit their applications to Microsoft for review. If it deems it malicious or violates the policies, they'll reject it. Microsoft tries to prevent users from running applications unless they've been distributed through the marketplace, but there are methods and ways you can sideload things. Again, the Windows platform uses a .NET managed code for applications, providing several security benefits and similar to other language environments such as Java, Davlik for Android. The Windows Phone also uses controlling execution manager that runs in the SRC, which will kill errant processes as needed if there are too many, if they use too many system resources. Meaning, you could have an application running and if it starts to consume too much resources and it looks like it's running while the operating system will take it upon itself to terminate the application. So he crashes with some apps that way. So supposed to be meant as a protection, but it can be a problem also. Silverlight and XNA, these are two different formats. XNA is used by the Xbox developer network.